Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and in a parallel universe, this is where it ended too. Doctor Who was originally given a 13-episode order in both 1963 and 2005, and the second and last episode of this story, The Edge of Destruction, is where those 13 episodes end. A cosmos without Doctor Who scarcely bears thinking about. Not that we know any different, of course, but the fact that the show is in such rude health 60 years later goes to show how much we value it. Think how many friendships have been forged because of it. So maybe not the world, but certainly our worlds would have been very, very different without it. We had our trip to Earth's past, and we've just had our jaunt onto the sci-fi world of a futuristic other planet. So what to do next? With only 2 episodes left to bump up the show's run to that initial batch of 13 ordered, there was very little they could do. They could have gone another trip to Earth's past, or they could have just repeated themselves and gone to another sci-fi story. But what they decided to do was set the story entirely on the ship. And by the way, I'm a big fan of calling it the ship at this point. I know they sometimes do call it the TARDIS occasionally, but every time the Doctor refers to it as the ship, I just get a little smile. It sort of implies he's yet to bond with it in the way he's going to, which is quite appropriate for this story. Okay, so the action is just limited to within the TARDIS itself, and not all of its sprawling insides. Really, it's the console room and an adjacent one. But don't go thinking that that means that this story lacks ambition. I would say that these 2 episodes inside the spaceship are actually, they could be the most ambitious yet. Not in terms of production values, obviously, more in terms of drama and character. Pitting the travellers against each other is actually very affecting, especially after everything that they've just been through, what with the Tribe of Gum and with the Daleks, and that's something that Barbara is very quick to point out when accusations of sabotage start flying her way. Barbara giving it back to the Doctor quite so firmly, and listing all of the help they've given him up to then, is the reason she's my favourite character at this point. Likewise, the Doctor being so quick to point the finger quite maliciously at Ian and Barbara is really interesting to me, because I don't know about anybody else, I'm instantly against him at that point. Ian and Barbara have not only been taken against their will and thrown into ordeal after obstacle after nightmare, they've been far more active in trying to help the group get out of whatever situation they found themselves in, and help other groups that they've met along the way, than they have in trying to play the blame game with the Doctor. They'd be well within their rights to, but it just doesn't seem to be their impulse, which makes me love them all the more, and distrust the Doctor all the more when he turns against them. This is one of the earliest, and maybe one of the strongest examples that corroborate that assertion that some have, future showrunners included, that the main characters are quite often the companions. When pitted against Daleks, when pitted against cavemen, I root for all 4 of them. But when pitted against each other, I root for Ian and Barbara every time. The ongoing story that we're being shown is 2 school teachers abducted by an alien and consistently placed in great danger. When you frame it like that, any story that invites the audience to side with the alien abductor over the innocent humans isn't doing a good job. Because a story that does invite sympathy for the alien abductor over and above the humans is a story about insidious human invaders on a benevolent alien ship. And that's not the story we've been shown. Now, Doctor Who is far more nuanced than either one of those stories. We come to love the Doctor, we see this group of people form a strong friendship, so by having sympathy for both parties, we're immediately elevated over humans equal good and aliens equal bad. But at this point in the show, Ian and Barbara are not a guilty party, and the Doctor's being a dick. So of course I'm going to side with them. To enhance that nuance that detractors of the show will never truly be aware of, there are moments in this story that really remind us of how alien the Doctor is and how little we have a handle on him. When he threatens to eject Ian and Barbara, it's as worrying as it is, because even though we've spent 11 episodes with him and even started to enjoy his company at this point, it's really plausible that he might do it. However, even among all of that, there are still moments that show us the Doctor that we will come to know and love. There's a really lovely early glimpse of that doctorish eccentricity when Ian asks him to check the fault locator and the Doctor replies with, "Yes, I'm glad I thought of that." And then later on, in the 2nd episode, we also get what could have been the first grandstanding Doctor speech. It doesn't quite play out like that because of the limitations on production. Out of necessity, they kind of have to film it as if it's live TV, and William Hartnell has to read it off cue cards, which doesn't do it any favours, and it's probably why future Doctors aren't given it to read at conventions. That said, While the limitations of TV production at the time, which isn't a dig by the way, there's no issue with the set or anything like that, it's just that they had to rocket through it before they turned the lights off in the studio. That's how TV was made back then. Even though that does hamper it, the Doctor's giddy joy by the end of it is actually really lovely to watch, and it's another one of those rays of light that William Hartnell really judiciously and preciously lets shine through to soften the Doctor's otherwise grumpy demeanour. By the end of this story, it really does feel like the Travellers have come together as a unit, far more so than ever before. And because of that, it does feel like a culmination of the 3 stories up until this point. And despite all of the nasty, vicious, horrible things that were said to each other, the Doctor holding out an olive branch to Barbara at the end is really a sign of things to come, and how Doctor Who would continue going forward. But for that to have any meaning at all, they really do have to be put through the ringer beforehand, and they certainly are. Okay, so it may look a little shoddy at times now, and is a little bit stagey in terms of performances, but there is still something jarringly bizarre about the character's behaviour, Ian's in particular, at the beginning of this story. Susan gets the more menacing work on paper, standing about looking creepily vacant with scissors, but it's Ian's being slightly odd and dreamlike that I think is more effective. Although, I think Caroline Ford does a fantastic job in the delivery of the line, "In one of us," when asked where could an intruder be hiding in the ship. And I just want to say again that as Susan is a character that's laden with a less than stellar reputation, Caroline Ford often gets overlooked as a result, which is a shame. She doesn't always make the performance choices you'd expect, and she's a very key reason as to why the story of that very first episode unfolds as successfully as it does. With this story, she's a very big part of why, for me, the threat works. It's a family tea time TV show, and there are times when she plays it like she's in a horror movie. Yes, the story is weird, unsettling, and, say it quietly Chris, slow, but I think those are deliberate intentions. Obviously that makes no difference if you don't care for the story, and there are a lot of people that don't. It's just that I think that ambition really shines through. It's a digestible length at only 2 episodes, and would likely begin to outstay its welcome if it went on much longer, but I've always been very fond of it. I've always had a sneaking suspicion that it got watched in isolation a lot, which is only going to reflect negatively on it. And that's why I always advocate for watching Doctor Who in order, if you can, because in context, after the 2 ordeals the leads have just had, it works even better. When the crew do start to galvanise towards the end, it offers some supremely satisfying moments. Convinced the end is about to come, the Doctor asks Ian if he'll face it with him. I absolutely adore that. Then there's that coda I mentioned a little bit earlier where the Doctor has a heart-to-heart with Barbara, and the extent to which she and Ian have impacted on the Doctor's outlook starts to become apparent. There's a germ of it a little bit earlier on. Barbara has a theory about something that the Doctor says is not logical, and then she replies, well, does it have to be? That sort of thing, the Doctor then starts to not write anything off. The fact that the whole affair has been caused by a stuck button on the console has been dismissed by some as underwhelming, and I can see that, I get it. It's just that I, for one, delight in the mundane explanation for that. I mean, the simplest explanation is sometimes the most satisfying, and I don't know, I just really buy into the triviality of a malfunctioning button being the cause of all the distress. It also offers up that idea kicked off by Ian in the first episode of the TARDIS as alive. Not in the way we understand it, of course, but definitely more than a machine, something that the Doctor didn't even seem aware of either, which is another really tasty ingredient in the mystery of Doctor Who. That the TARDIS would somehow try to alert its occupants that something was wrong with it, but ending up creating this verging on trippy nightmare makes perfect sense to me if you think that A, not really understanding how to communicate with them, and B, being a little bit under the weather while trying to do so. Like the fevered ramblings of a patient whose language you don't speak. The idea that the TARDIS is alive has, by this point, been something the show has taken hold of and run with it. But this is the first indicator that Ian's suspicions in that first episode in the junkyard were correct. Doctor Who is now 60 years old, and we watch so much of it in the past tense through the veneer of hindsight that it can be really refreshing to forget everything you know when you watch early Doctor Who. Ian mentions the Doctor's heart, singular, at one point, for example, and that should be something that sticks out given what decisions the show is going to make about that in the future, but for me, it just doesn't stick out. Sure, we can try and come up with explanations for these sorts of things. Fandom has done that for decades. We can retcon it that Ian only thought to check for one heart, because why would he assume the Doctor has 2? There are some that have even gone as far to say that in his first incarnation, the Doctor only had 1 heart. I don't really feel the need to do either of those things though. At this point, it hasn't been decided that the Doctor has 2 hearts, and so we don't know that he has 2 hearts yet. It's as simple as that. After all, the lore of Doctor Who will change in far more significant ways the more we go on. 13 episodes in, and the programme has done nothing to diminish my enthusiasm for the crew's adventures. I am so glad that these weren't the grand finale of Doctor Who, as they so easily could have been. For me, it's the Doctor asking Ian if he will stand firm and face the end with him. If only Hartnell's reading of the cue cards, or trying to remember the script, whichever one of those is true, weren't so obvious, that speech about a new solar system being born would be absolutely sublime. So, The Edge of Destruction, out of 5. Not to bore you, it's another 4. Really solid 2 episodes, really creepy, really unsettling, does something new this early on in the show. I think it's a really strong outing, where it's more of a lock-in. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, once again, you know how YouTube works. Stick your thumbs up, it really does help. And what do you lot think of The Edge of Destruction? Does it suck you into its creepy, unsettling vibe, or does it leave you outside in the cold? Are you on Ian and Barbara's side, or are you with the Doctor all the way? Let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you back here for our first dip into the reconstructions. Not only is it our first missing episode, it's going to be our first entire missing story. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang that cloister bell, and I'll meet you back here at the roof of the world. See you soon.